I was still in my graduation robe when my sister stood up, smiling that benevolent smile, and announced to 23 guests that we were selling the lake house to pay off my student loans. The problem was, I had zero debt, and she had absolutely no right to sell my property. Then, at exactly 7:30, my phone rang. One sentence from the bank froze the room because it did not just expose a lie, it triggered an active fraud investigation right then and there. My name is Millie Green, and if there is one thing I have learned about my family, it is that they do not know how to celebrate without an agenda. I sat at the head of the long mahogany table in the private dining room of a steakhouse in Midtown Manhattan. The air smelled of seared beef, expensive red wine, and performative affection. To any outsider, or perhaps to a waiter glancing in through the frosted glass of the double doors, this looked like the perfect portrait of American success. There were 23 people in the room, a curated collection of aunts, uncles, cousins, and family friends, all raising crystal flutes in my direction. My diploma, encased in a heavy leather folder embossed with the New York University seal, sat on the white tablecloth next to my bread plate like a prop in a play I had not agreed to star in. The applause was polite, the smiles were wide. The clinking of silverware against china had a rhythmic, almost military precision, but I felt the shift in atmospheric pressure the moment the appetizers were cleared. I knew the texture of this silence. It was not the silence of contentment, it was the silence of people who were waiting for the main event, and I knew with a sinking certainty that the main event was not my Master of Business Administration degree. It was me. Or rather, it was the version of me they were addicted to fixing. My sister, Brianna, was the architect of this particular ambiance. She sat 3 seats to my right, looking like she had just walked out of a catalog for suburban royalty. She was 35 years old and wore her life like a badge of honor that she expected everyone else to polish. Her hair was a golden cascade of salon-perfect waves, stiff with just enough product to hold its shape against the humidity, and her dress was a shade of blue that screamed capable benevolence. She was smiling at me, but the smile did not reach her eyes. Her eyes were scanning the table, checking the placement of the napkins, checking the wine levels, checking the audience. Next to her sat Gavin, her husband. If Brianna was the shark, Gavin was the pilot fish, though tonight he looked more like a man waiting for a bomb to go off. He was vibrating with nervous energy. He kept adjusting his tie, a piece of silk that looked too tight for his neck, and his eyes were glued to his phone. He was typing furiously, his thumbs moving in a blur under the table. Every few seconds, he would glance up at Brianna, receive a microscopic nod or a sharp look, and then dive back into his screen. I took a sip of water. It was ice cold. I let the chill slide down my throat, grounding me. Mom and Dad were seated on either side of me. Dad cleared his throat. It was a sound I associated with bad news. The same sound he had made when our golden retriever died, and the same sound he made when he told me I should not apply to Ivy League schools because the rejection would hurt too much. "We are so proud of you, Millie," Dad said, his voice pitched slightly too loud, as if he were trying to convince himself. He placed a hand on my shoulder. His palm was heavy and warm. "Getting this degree, it is a big step, a huge step." "It really is," Mom added, her voice dropping to that sweet, concerned register that usually preceded a surgical strike on my self-esteem. She leaned in, smelling of lavender and judgment. "But now that the celebration is underway, we think it is time we had a realistic conversation about what comes next, about the future." There it was, the word realistic. In the lexicon of the Green family, realistic was a code word for lower your expectations. I kept my face perfectly neutral. This was a skill I had honed over 4 years of working in high-stakes equity while pretending to be a struggling student. I had learned that my family did not want the truth. They did not want to know that I had been working full-time at Hawthorne Ridge Partners since I was 25. They did not want to know that my bonuses alone were larger than Brianna's annual household income. They preferred the narrative where I was the chaotic, artistic, slightly unstable baby sister who needed to be managed. It gave them a sense of purpose. It gave Brianna a pedestal. So, I had let them keep it. I wore simple clothes around them. I drove a 10-year-old sedan when I visited home. I never talked about money. I let them believe I was drowning in student loans, and that this MBA was a desperate, debt-fueled attempt to find a corporate job I would inevitably hate. "I am listening," I said softly. Brianna placed her fork down. She did it deliberately, the metal making a sharp clink against the porcelain. She picked up her phone from the table and, with a movement that felt rehearsed, turned it face down. It was a gesture of theatrical, undivided attention. She wanted everyone to see that she was prioritizing her little sister over the digital world. "Millie," Brianna said, her voice projecting to the back of the room. The chatter among the cousins died down. The aunts stopped chewing. The room pivoted. "We know you are worried. We know the job market is tough right now, especially for someone with your lack of traditional experience. And we know the debt from NYU is hanging over your head like a dark cloud." I saw Gavin stop texting. He shoved his phone into his jacket pocket and picked up his wine glass, draining half of it in one swallow. He looked pale. "We have been talking," Mom said, squeezing my arm. "The whole family. We just want to help you start fresh. We do not want you to be crippled by these loans before you even begin your life." I felt the vibration before I saw it. My phone was sitting next to my water glass. It was a sleek, black device, silent and unassuming. The screen lit up for a fraction of a second, a banner notification sliding across the locked glass. Because of the angle, only I could see it. "Alert. Your property has been listed. MLS VT 89204, status active." My heart did not race. My breath did not hitch. Instead, a cold, crystalline clarity washed over me. It was the same feeling I got when I spotted a discrepancy in a financial report. The moment the numbers whispered that someone was lying, I knew exactly what property that was. I knew exactly where it was located. And I knew exactly who was sitting at this table, thinking they had the power to sell it. I looked at Brianna. She was beaming now. A look of beatific sacrifice plastered across her face. She looked like a saint who was about to bestow a miracle upon a beggar. She had no idea that the beggar owned the bank. I looked at Gavin. He was staring at the centerpiece, a generic arrangement of white lilies, refusing to meet my eyes. He knew. Of course he knew. He was a part of it. I looked at my parents. Their faces were masks of supportive pity. They truly believed they were saving me. They believed it so deeply that they had bypassed the minor inconvenience of asking for my permission. The notification on my phone faded, the screen going black again. The secret was safe in the dark glass. "We have a solution," Brianna said, her voice thickening with emotion. "A way to wipe the slate clean for you." I did not speak. I did not ask what the solution was. I did not ask how they planned to pay off loans that did not exist. I just watched them. I reached for my water glass again. My hand was steady. I took a slow, deliberate sip, watching Brianna over the rim of the glass. I wanted her to feel safe. I wanted her to commit. I wanted her to say the words out loud, in front of 23 witnesses, so that when the trap snapped shut, there would be no ambiguity about who had walked into it. The waiter came by to refill the wine glasses. He moved like a ghost, sensing the tension, pouring the dark red liquid and retreating instantly. "Millie," Mom asked, her brow furrowing slightly. "Are you okay? You seem quiet." "I am just overwhelmed," I said. The lie tasted like ash, but it was necessary. "I am just waiting to hear what you have to say." Brianna exchanged a look with our mother. It was a look of triumph. See, the look said, "She is desperate. She is ready to accept whatever we give her." I glanced at the Rolex on my left wrist, a vintage piece I usually took off before seeing them. But today, amidst the chaos of graduation, I had forgotten. It was stainless steel, understated, easy to mistake for a cheap fashion watch if you did not know what to look for. The hands on the dial read 7:27 in the evening. I had scheduled the call for 7:30. I had contacted the fraud department at Harbor Point Bank 3 hours ago, right after my real estate attorney had flagged the unauthorized access to the deed. I had told them I would be at a dinner. I had told them to call me at exactly 7:30. I had told them that I would be surrounded by the people who were trying to defraud me, and that I needed them to be precise. 3 minutes. Brianna cleared her throat again. Preparing for her big reveal, she placed her hands on the table, palms down. She looked like she was about to launch a presidential campaign. "We know how much you loved the lake house," she began, her tone mournful, as if she were talking about a dead pet. I kept my face blank. The lake house, my sanctuary. The place I had spent every weekend for the last 2 years restoring. The place where I had put down new hardwood floors with my own hands. Where I had reinforced the boathouse. Where I had installed a security system that sent alerts directly to my private server. "But," she continued, "it is just sitting there. It is a drain on resources. And honestly, Millie, with your financial situation, you cannot afford the upkeep. Mom and Dad cannot keep paying the taxes on a property that provides no return." This was an interesting fabrication. Considering I had paid the property taxes 2 months ago, I had paid them from a trust account that my parents did not know existed. "So," Brianna said, her smile widening, showing perfect, white teeth, "we decided to step in." I looked at the phone again. 7:28 in the evening, 2 minutes. The room was silent now. The 23 guests were leaning in. This was the theater they had come for. The Green family drama. The salvation of poor, incompetent Millie. I looked at the notifications that had silently piled up behind the black screen of my phone. There was an email from my lawyer. There was a confirmation from the bank. And there was that first alert. The one that had started the clock property listed. I felt a strange sense of detachment. It was as if I were watching a car crash in slow motion. But I was not in the car. I was standing on the sidewalk, holding the detonator. "You decided to step in," I repeated, my voice flat. "Yes," Brianna said. She looked at Gavin. "Gavin and I, we handled the heavy lifting. We did not want to stress you out during finals week." "That was very considerate," I said. "We are family," Mom said, her eyes misting over. "That is what family does." I looked at the watch. 7:29 in the evening. The second hand swept around the dial. It moved with an agonizing, beautiful slowness. 40 seconds, 30 seconds, 20. Brianna took a deep breath. She was ready to drop the number. She was ready to tell me that she had sold my soul for pennies, and she expected me to thank her for it. "We found a buyer. Millie," she said. 10 seconds. "And we got a great price," Gavin squeaked, speaking for the first time. 5 seconds. I set my water glass down. I folded my hands in my lap. I looked straight at Brianna, locking eyes with her. "Is that so?" I asked. And then, exactly as the second hand hit the 12, my phone began to ring. It was a standard ringtone, nothing dramatic, but in the silence of the room, it sounded like a fire alarm. The screen lit up with a number that I knew by heart, but which showed up as unknown caller to everyone else. I did not reach for it immediately. I let it ring once, twice. "You should get that," Brianna said, annoyed that her moment was being interrupted. "It is probably a recruiter or a bill collector," she laughed lightly. A few cousins chuckled politely. "Yes," I said, standing up slowly. I picked up the phone. "I should get this." I swiped the screen to answer. I did not put it to my ear. Instead, I pressed the speaker button and set the phone back down in the center of the tablecloth, right next to the crystal vase of lilies. "Hello?" I said. The voice that filled the room was crisp, professional, and loud enough for all 23 people to hear. "Ms. Green," the voice asked. "This is Grant Ellis from the Fraud and Compliance Division at Harbor Point Bank. I am calling regarding the emergency alert on your mortgage for the property at 142 Lakeview Drive, Vermont." The smile on Brianna's face did not just fade. It evaporated. It was replaced by a look of confusion that was rapidly curdled into terror. "I am here," I said, my voice steady. "We have detected a critical security breach," Grant continued, his voice echoing off the expensive wood paneling. We have received a contract of sale and a power of attorney document submitted this morning. However, our system flagged the signature as a mismatch, and the notary stamp appears to be linked to a suspended license. We are initiating an immediate freeze on the asset. I looked around the table. The silence now was absolute. It was heavy. It was suffocating. And Ms. Green, Grant added, delivering the line that I knew would shatter the room. Because the transaction attempted to utilize federal banking channels with falsified credentials. We are legally required to open a fraud investigation. Is this a good time to verify your identity? I looked at Brianna. She was frozen. Her mouth was slightly open. Her face was the color of old paper. Gavin had stopped breathing. Yes, Grant, I said, looking directly at my sister. This is a perfect time. To understand why my sister felt comfortable selling a house that did not belong to her, you have to understand the taxonomy of the Green family. In our ecosystem, roles are not assigned by merit or reality. They are assigned by birth order and maintained by a stubborn refusal to update the data. I am the youngest, in the eyes of my parents, and certainly in the eyes of my siblings. Being the youngest means I am permanently 22, slightly confused, and in desperate need of guidance. It does not matter that I am 29. It does not matter that I manage risk assessments that would make my father's blood pressure medication stop working. To them, I am the chaotic element, the variable that needs to be controlled. Ryan, my brother, sat across from me, dissecting his steak with the precision of a man who calculates the cost per bite. Ryan is 38 and holds an MBA he earned part-time over the course of 4 years while working a mid-level management job in logistics. He wears his degree like a suit of armor. He loves to remind everyone how hard he worked for it, how he balanced a family and a mortgage and night classes, because he struggled. He needs to believe that I struggled too, or preferably, that I did not struggle enough and therefore do not deserve what I have. He has always looked at me with a mixture of pity and resentment. To Ryan, I am the one who had it easy. I am the one who went to NYU full-time. I am the one who, in his narrative, is currently drowning in the consequences of my fancy education. If I am successful, it diminishes his grind. If I am failing, it validates his suffering. Then there is Brianna. If Ryan is the accountant of family grievances, Brianna is the CEO of Family Optics. She is a real estate agent in the suburbs of New Jersey, and if you let her talk for more than 5 minutes, she will tell you she is the top producer in her county. She builds her identity on being the capable one, the matriarch in training who cleans up the messes the rest of us supposedly make. She needs someone to save. If there is no damsel in distress, Brianna is perfectly capable of tying someone to the railroad tracks just so she can untie them later and wait for the applause. For the last 4 years, I have let them play these roles. I have let them believe that I am barely scraping by. The reality, which I have kept carefully compartmentalized away from their prying eyes and judgmental comments, is that I have been working at Hawthorne Ridge Partners since I was 25. It is not a job you find on a public listing board. It is a boutique investment firm where the buy-in starts at $5 million and the hours are brutal. I started as an analyst and clawed my way up to associate in record time. My family thinks I am unemployed or working some gig economy job to make ends meet while I study. They think this because it is the story that makes them comfortable. I remember when I got my first bonus. It was more money than my father made in 3 years at his peak. I had stared at the check, my hands shaking, and my first instinct was to call them. I wanted to call my dad and say that I had made it. I wanted to tell Mom she could retire if she wanted to. But then I remembered the last time I tried to share a win. It was the old cut, the wound that never quite healed. It happened at my undergraduate graduation. I had been excited about an opportunity to join a tech startup in Brooklyn, a risky, low-pay, high-equity role that I believed in. I laid out the plan over dinner, my eyes bright, my graphs prepared. My father had sighed. That heavy, disappointed exhale that sucks the oxygen out of a room. He told me to stop dreaming. He told me to be realistic. He told me that startups fail and that I needed health insurance and a 401k and a job title that his friends would understand. Ryan had laughed and asked if I planned to pay my rent with stock options that were worth zero. Brianna had patted my hand and offered to help me fix up my resume for a real administrative assistant position at her brokerage. That night, I learned a lesson that saved me 1,000 arguments. Honesty is an invitation for an audit. So, I stopped sharing. When I got the job at Hawthorne, I told them I was taking some extra courses. When I got promoted, I told them school was really intense. When I bought my own apartment in Brooklyn, a place with a view of the bridge and a doorman, I never invited them over. I met them at restaurants. I met them at the family home. I kept my life in a silo because I was tired. It is exhausting to constantly prove you are not a failure to people who are invested in seeing you fail. It takes less energy to just nod and say, "Yes, it is tough out there," than to explain the intricacies of a leveraged buyout to a brother who thinks he knows business because he manages a warehouse schedule. They filled in the blanks of my silence with their own fiction. They assumed I had racked up $200,000 in student loans for this MBA. They assumed I was living with 3 roommates in a basement in Queens. They assumed I was single because I was too unstable to keep a man. Not because I was married to my career and quite happy with the arrangement, and because they never truly asked, I never corrected them. But the lake house was different. The lake house was not just an asset. It was the only thing my grandfather had left behind that hadn't been liquidated and split up by the vultures. Grandpa was the only one who saw me. He was the one who taught me to play chess, who told me that being quiet didn't mean being weak. When he died, the family saw dollar signs. They saw a prime piece of real estate on Lake Champlain that could be sold to pay for kitchen renovations and new cars. They didn't know that Grandpa had set up a right of first refusal in his trust. They didn't know that I had used my first year's savings from Hawthorne to buy the house outright from the estate before it ever hit the open market. I bought it under an LLC to keep my name off the public search results that Brianna refreshes every morning. I kept it because it was mine. I spent my weekends there, not partying, but working. I stripped the lead paint. I replaced the rotting deck boards. I hired local contractors to shore up the foundation. It was my sanctuary, the one place where I wasn't Millie the disaster, but Millie the owner, now, sitting at this table, listening to Brianna talk about selling the lake house, as if it were a charitable act to save me from my imaginary poverty. I realized how deep the delusion went. They weren't just selling a house. They were performing an intervention for a problem that didn't exist. "Millie," Mom said, breaking my train of thought. She was looking at me with that gaze that was 50% love and 50% anxiety. "We know you might feel embarrassed about the loans, about needing help. I am not embarrassed." "Mom," I said. It was the truth. Ryan looked up the average starting salary for MBA graduates this year. Dad interjected, trying to be helpful. "It is not what it used to be, and with the economy the way it is." "I checked the numbers," Ryan said, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin. "Unless you are in the top 1% of your class going into a top-tier firm, you are looking at 5 years just to break even on the tuition. And let's be honest, Millie, you have been out of the workforce for 4 years. That gap on your resume is a killer." "The gap, the imaginary gap. I have been working, Ryan," I said gently. "Part-time stuff doesn't count." He waved his hand dismissively. "I mean real corporate experience, the kind that builds a career." I took a sip of wine to hide the smirk that was threatening to form. If only he knew that the part-time stuff involved managing a portfolio that was worth more than the GDP of a small island nation. "Ryan is right," Brianna chimed in. "That is why this sale is so important. It gives you a cushion. You can take an entry-level job without stressing about the payments. You can breathe." She looked so pleased with herself. She had solved the Millie problem. She had moved the pieces on the board, authorized a sale, and found a buyer, all to rescue her little sister. The irony was acidic. They were trying to save me from financial ruin by committing financial fraud. I looked at Gavin again. He was the weak link. He knew real estate laws. He knew that you could not sell a house you did not own. He knew that you could not sign a deed without the owner present unless you had a power of attorney. And that was the key. A power of attorney. I had never signed one. I had never authorized Brianna to act on my behalf, which meant that somewhere, in the last 48 hours, my sister or her husband had forged my signature. They had crossed the line from overbearing family to felony. Why was it really just to help me? Or was there something else? I looked at Brianna's handbag, a designer piece that I knew cost $4,000. I looked at the lease on Gavin's new luxury SUV. I looked at the way they were sweating. Despite the air conditioning in the restaurant being set to a crisp 68 degrees, people do not commit forgery just to be nice. They do it because they are desperate. You mentioned the buyer is paying cash, I asked, keeping my voice light, as if I were just curious about the details of my own rescue. Yes, Brianna said eagerly. $720,000, a quick close, 30 days. That sounds low, I said. For a waterfront property in that condition. The condition is terrible, Millie, Gavin said, his voice jumping an octave. The roof is shot. The dock is falling apart. Honestly, we are lucky to get that offer. The buyer is taking it as is. I stared at him. The roof had been replaced last October. The dock was brand new. Built with pressure-treated cedar 3 months ago. They had not even been to the house. Or if they had, they were lying to the rest of the family to justify the low price. 720, I repeated. It clears your debt, Mom said soothingly, and leaves you a little nest egg. They had done the math. They had decided how much my life was worth, subtracted the imaginary debt, and patted themselves on the back. I felt a cold anger settle in my chest. It wasn't the hot, reactive anger of a child. It was the cold, calculating anger of an investor who realizes their partner is embezzling funds. I realized then that I could stop this. I could slam my hand on the table, scream that I was rich, scream that the house was perfect, scream that they were criminals. I could pull up my bank account on my phone and show them a balance that would make Ryan faint. But that wouldn't teach them anything. That would just make me the villain again. If I yelled, I was the hysterical youngest child. If I bragged about my money, I was the arrogant, ungrateful daughter. No, I needed them to hear it from someone else. I needed them to hear it from an authority they couldn't dismiss, couldn't gaslight, and couldn't bully. I needed the bank. I looked at the clock on the wall. The second hand was ticking closer to the half-hour mark. You know, I said, leaning back in my chair, I really appreciate how much thought you have put into this. It must have taken a lot of coordination. We just want you to be secure, Dad said. Secure, I echoed. I thought about the security of the fraud investigation that was currently spinning up on a server in downtown Manhattan. I thought about the security of the recorded line that Grant Ellis was about to speak into. I have one question, I said, looking at Brianna. How did you manage to list it so fast? I mean, don't you need signatures, paperwork? Brianna hesitated for a fraction of a second. We have our ways. In this market, you have to move fast. Gavin pulled some strings. Strings, I said. Interesting. The waiter arrived with the main course, steak sizzling on hot plates. The smell of rosemary and butter filled the room. It was a celebration dinner, after all. Let's eat, Dad said, raising his glass again. To Millie's fresh start. To the truth, I whispered, lifting my water glass. They all drank. They cut into their steaks. They chewed and swallowed, oblivious to the fact that the ground beneath their feet had already crumbled away. They were dining on the edge of a cliff, and I was the only one who could see the drop. I watched Brianna check her phone again. She was probably expecting a text from the buyer, or maybe her broker, confirming that the deal was locked. She had no idea that the only confirmation coming her way was a subpoena. I felt a vibration in my pocket, not the phone on the table, my other phone, the work phone. It was a message from my assistant at Hawthorne, probably about the Asian markets opening. It was a reminder of the world I actually lived in, a world of consequences. My family lived in a world of intentions. They meant well, or so they told themselves. They loved me, or so they claimed, but their love was a cage. It was a love that required me to be small so they could feel big. It was a love that required me to be broken so they could feel whole. And today, for the first time in 29 years, I was going to break the cage. I sat there, surrounded by the people who shared my DNA, and I felt like a stranger, but a powerful stranger. I was not the little sister anymore. I was the witness for the prosecution. The stage was set, the players were in position, and as the minute hand clicked over, I knew that the Millie they thought they knew was about to die, and the woman I actually was would be the one left standing over the wreckage. The waiter had just cleared the main course, leaving behind a few stray crumbs and the heavy, lingering scent of roasted meat. When the atmosphere in the room shifted, it was a subtle change at first, like the drop in temperature before a summer storm, but I felt it in my bones. The casual chatter about sports scores and weather patterns died down, replaced by a synchronized hush that felt meticulously rehearsed. My mother was the one to cut the ribbon on the ambush. She placed her hand on mine again. Her palm was damp, and her grip was tight, bordering on painful. She looked at me with watery eyes, the kind of look a parent gives a child who has just scraped their knee, except I was 29 years old, and the wound she was tending to was entirely imaginary. "Millie," she began, her voice trembling with a performative fragility, "we have been holding our breath. Honey, we know you have been putting on a brave face today. We know you want us to think everything is fine." I did not move. I did not blink. I let her project her anxiety onto me like a film on a blank screen. "But we are your parents," she continued, looking around the table to gather support from the audience. "And we know the reality. We know about the crushing weight of the loans. We know that the job market is not what you hoped it would be. We lie awake at night. Millie, your father and I, we just lie there and worry about your future." The table was silent. 23 pairs of eyes were fixed on me, filled with a cocktail of pity and morbid curiosity. They were waiting for me to break. They were waiting for me to admit defeat, so they could rush in and feel good about themselves. "Mom," I started to say, keeping my voice level, "I appreciate the concern, but I was cut off before I could finish." "No, listen," my father interrupted, his voice stern but laden with that same suffocating care. "We are not here to lecture you. We are here to fix this." That was the cue. Brianna stood up. She did not just stand. She ascended. She pushed her chair back with a scraping sound that commanded attention and rose to her full height, smoothing out her dress. She looked around the room, making eye contact with the key stakeholders, the wealthy uncle, the gossiping aunt, our parents, before letting her gaze settle on me. She looked like a master of ceremonies at a charity gala, ready to unveil the grand prize. "Coughing up the courage to do this wasn't easy," Brianna announced, her voice pitched to reach the back corners of the private room. "But we realized that sometimes love means making the hard decisions for the people who cannot make them for themselves." She paused for effect. It was a flawless performance. "We have all talked," she said, gesturing vaguely to the room, implying a family consensus that had taken place without me. "And we have found a solution, a way to liberate Millie from this financial hole so she can start her life at zero, instead of negative 200,000. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap. I was dissecting her words, analyzing the legal implications of every sentence. "The lake house," Brianna said. She let the words hang there. "We all know it," she continued, her tone shifting to one of practical regret. "It was Grandpa's pride and joy. But let's be honest, it has been sitting up there in Vermont, gathering dust. It is a drain. It is a tax burden, and right now, it is an asset that is doing absolutely nothing for this family." She spoke of the house as if it were a rusted-out car on blocks in the front yard, not a pristine waterfront property on one of the most desirable lakes in New England. She spoke of it as family property, a collective resource waiting to be harvested. "So," Brianna said, clasping her hands together, "I stepped up. I reached out to my network. I made some calls to people who trust me. People who know that when I bring a deal to the table, It is solid. She looked at me then, her eyes gleaming with a terrifying mixture of arrogance and benevolence. Millie, I found a buyer. I could feel Gavin shifting in his seat next to her. He was nodding vigorously, backing her up. And not just any buyer, Brianna went on. A cash buyer, someone who is willing to close immediately. We are talking about a lifeline, Millie, a complete reset. She took a breath, preparing to deliver the number. I braced myself. I knew the market value of my home. I knew the recent comps. I knew that a house 3 doors down, with half the square footage and no boathouse, had just sold for $1.2 million. They have agreed to pay $720,000, Brianna announced triumphantly. The room gasped softly. To them, it sounded like a fortune. To them, $720,000 was a lottery win that would wipe out my imaginary debt and leave me with a down payment for a sensible condo. To me, it was theft. It was a fire sale price, a steal so egregious that it bordered on criminal negligence. $720,000, Gavin repeated, leaning forward. Cash, closing in 30 days, no contingencies. Brianna smiled at me, waiting for my tears of gratitude. I know you are overwhelmed, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was still loud enough for everyone to hear. I know you have been drowning in finals and job applications. You are not in a headspace to handle negotiations. You are not in a headspace to deal with inspections and counteroffers. Then came the sentence that made the blood run cold in my veins. So, you don't have to worry about a thing, Brianna said. I accepted the offer for you. The air left the room. For a second, I thought I had misheard. I thought perhaps she meant she had verbally agreed to present the offer to me. But her face told a different story. She looked satisfied. She looked like she had just crossed the finish line. You accepted it, I asked. My voice was quiet, barely a ripple in the pond of their celebration. I did, she said, beaming. I signed the initial agreement this morning. I acted as your proxy. Because I knew, Millie, I knew that if I came to you with this, you would freeze, you would get emotional, you would cling to the past instead of choosing your future. I took that burden off your shoulders. She had confessed, in front of 23 witnesses. My sister had just admitted to signing a legal contract for a property she did not own, using authority she did not possess. And honestly, Gavin chimed in, his voice loud and blustery, trying to fill the silence I had left. The price is a miracle. That place is a wreck. Millie, let's be real. It is old. The roof is practically caving in. The foundation has issues. This buyer is doing us a favor by taking it off our hands before it becomes a liability. I looked at Gavin. He was lying through his teeth. Or perhaps he was just repeating the lie Brianna had told him. The roof was slate, installed 6 months ago. The foundation had been reinforced with steel and concrete last summer. The house was in better condition than the one they lived in, but the family didn't know that. They nodded along, sipping their wine. Gavin is right, Aunt Linda said from across the table. Old houses are money pits. Better to sell now. Exactly, Brianna said. We are selling the house to save the sister. It is the right thing to do. She raised her glass. To Millie, she said, to a debt-free future, to starting over. The response was automatic. It was a wave of social pressure that crashed over the table. To Millie, to the future. Great job, Brianna. Glasses clinked. People smiled at me. They were toasting to my incompetence. They were celebrating the fact that I was so incapable of managing my own life that my sister had to commit a felony to rescue me. They were rewriting my history in real time, casting me as the tragic figure and Brianna as the hero. I picked up my glass. I had to. If I didn't, the narrative would break too soon. I needed to see how far this went. I needed to see the mechanics of the trap before I dismantled it. Thank you, I said. The words felt like broken glass in my mouth. I am speechless. I really am. Oh, sweetie, Mom said, reaching over to squeeze my hand again. You don't have to thank us. We are family. I took a sip of water, using the glass to hide the expression on my face. My mind was racing, connecting the dots. Grant Ellis, the fraud investigator, was on the line. He was listening to this. He was recording every word. He had just heard the confession. But there was one piece missing. How had she physically bypassed the digital safeguards? How had she convinced a listing agent to move forward without my direct verification? Brianna sat back down, basking in the glow of the room's approval. She placed her phone on the table again. Face up this time. She was too confident now. She thought the danger had passed. She thought I was subdued. The screen lit up with a notification. It was close to my hand. I glanced at it, not moving my head, just shifting my eyes. It was an email notification. The preview showed a document signed alert from a DocuSign platform. But it was the email address at the top of the screen that made my heart stop and then restart with a cold, predatory rhythm. The account logged into the mail app on her phone wasn't Brianna, Caldwell Mail, com. It was Millie, Green, Legal Mail, com. It was an address that looked official. It was an address that looked like it belonged to me. It was an address that differed from my actual personal email by only a single character. A subtle variation that would pass a cursory glance by a lazy real estate agent or a rushed title officer. She hadn't just forged a signature. She had created an entire digital persona. She had built a fake Millie Green. She was communicating with the world as me, approving documents as me, and undoubtedly intercepting the verification emails that were supposed to alert me to this exact situation. That was not a crime of passion. That was not a sister trying to help. That was identity theft. That was premeditated, calculated fraud. I looked up from the phone and met Brianna's eyes. She was smiling at me, a look of pure, unadulterated satisfaction. "You will thank me later," she mouthed. I smiled back. It was a small, tight smile. "I am sure I will," I said. I picked up my knife and fork and cut a piece of the steak that had gone cold on my plate. I chewed slowly. So they actually did it. I thought, they actually walked into the bank vault, took a selfie, and posted it online. The timeline in my head shifted. I didn't just want to stop the sale anymore. I wanted to understand the depth of the rot. I wanted to know who else was involved. I wanted to know if Gavin was just a pawn or a co-conspirator. I looked at the clock. It was now 7:35. The phone I had placed on the table, the one connected to the bank, was still silent. The call active but muted on my end. Grant Ellis was waiting. I swallowed the food. "So," I said, keeping my voice conversational, almost light. "Who is the buyer? Anyone we know?" Brianna laughed. A light, tinkling sound. "Oh, no, just an investor. Someone Gavin knows from the club. Very private." "Private," I repeated. "That is good. Private is good." I looked at the fake email address on her screen one more time before the light faded to black. Millie, Green, Legal. The audacity was breathtaking. "Well," I said, reaching for my real phone, the one connected to the speaker. "I suppose we should celebrate properly." I unmuted the call. "Grant," I said, my voice cutting through the chatter of the room like a scalpel. "Did you catch that last part about the email address?" The room didn't react immediately. They didn't understand who I was talking to. They thought I was talking to a waiter, or perhaps making a strange joke, but Brianna froze. Her hand, which had been reaching for her wine glass, stopped in midair. "I did. Ms. Green," Grant's voice boomed from the speakerphone, louder this time, startling Aunt Linda into dropping her fork. "We have noted the admission of proxy signature and the existence of a secondary email account. The investigation team is tracing the IP address creation logs now." The silence that followed was not the rehearsed silence of the family intervention. It was the terrified silence of people realizing there was a stranger in the room, and that stranger was holding a badge. To understand why I didn't flip the table the moment Brianna announced the sale, you have to understand that the ambush didn't start at the restaurant. For me, the timeline of this disaster began exactly 5 hours earlier, in the back of a black town car moving through traffic on the FDR Drive. It was 2:15 in the afternoon. The city was sweating under a rare May heatwave. and I was checking my emails between a final portfolio review and the drive to the graduation ceremony. That was when the first notification from the title monitoring service pinged on my phone. Property alert 142, Lakeview Drive. Status change. Active listing. I stared at the screen. My first reaction wasn't anger. It was a professional confusion. I assumed it was a glitch in the county clerk's database. I refreshed the app. The listing was there, bold and bright, syndicated across 3 major real estate platforms. But it was the subheader that made the hair on my arms stand up. Listing agent Brianna Caldwell. Seller representation estate of Millicent Green. Authorized representative. Estate. In the language of real estate law, you list a property as an estate sale when the owner is dead or mentally incapacitated. Brianna hadn't just listed my house. She had legally declared me a non-entity. She had designated herself the authorized representative, a title that implies a power structure that simply did not exist. I didn't call her. I didn't text our parents. That is what the old Millie would have done, the Millie who sought validation. The Millie who would have begged for an explanation. The Millie who managed hundreds of millions in assets did something different. I called Marcus. Marcus is a real estate attorney who charges $900 an hour, and he is worth every penny. I have used him for 3 acquisitions, and he knows my portfolio better than my own mother knows my middle name. Marcus, I said when he picked up on the first ring, I need you to pull the county records for the Vermont property immediately. Someone listed it. I need to see the authorization document they uploaded to the multiple listing service. Give me 2 minutes, Marcus said. No small talk. I waited in the silence of the car, watching the East River blur by. I felt a cold, hard knot forming in my stomach. It wasn't the heat. It was the realization that my sister's savior complex had finally metastasized into something illegal. Got it, Marcus said, his voice coming through the car's speakers. It is a power of attorney, standard New York statutory short form, dated 3 days ago. I didn't sign a power of attorney. Marcus, I said. I know you didn't, he replied. Because the notary stamp on this belongs to a man named Gerald Fitzsimmons, and if I recall correctly, Gerald Fitzsimmons lost his notary commission last year for notarizing documents without the signatory present. Also, the signature looks traced. It is shaky. It looks like someone projected your signature from a digital image and tried to draw over it. Send it to me, I said. When the PDF landed in my inbox, I zoomed in. It was clumsy. It was desperate. It was Brianna. What do you want to do? Marcus asked. I can have a cease and desist on her desk in 20 minutes. I can have the listing pulled within the hour. We can file a police report for forgery before you even put on your cap and gown. I looked at the document. I thought about the dinner tonight. I thought about the speeches. I thought about the way my family would look at me, the pity, the condescension, the "we are doing this for your own good" narrative that they had been force-feeding me for decades. If I stopped this now, quietly, Brianna would spin it. She would tell our parents that she tried to help, but I was ungrateful. She would say I was stubborn. She would paint herself as the martyr who was thwarted by her irrational little sister. The narrative would remain, Brianna is the capable one. Millie is the mess. No, I said. Do not pull the listing. Millie, Marcus warned, this is dangerous. If they get an offer. They won't get an offer, I cut in. Who is the buyer's agent on the pending status? I see it just flipped to under contract while we were talking. Let me check, Marcus said. It is an agent named Sarah Jenkins, representing a buyer named Arthur Henderson. Contact Arthur Henderson's attorney, I commanded. Do not contact Brianna. Contact the buyer directly. Send them the proof of my ownership. Send them a copy of the deed. Tell them that the seller listed on the contract does not have the authority to sell a bicycle, let alone a lake house. And tell them that if they proceed, they will be purchasing a lawsuit, not a vacation home. You want to kill the deal from the bottom up, Marcus realized. I want the buyer to run, I said. But I want Brianna to think she still has a deal until she says it out loud in front of everyone. Consider it done, Marcus said. I will make the call now. That was step one. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, while I was sitting through the commencement speeches, my phone buzzed with a confirmation from Marcus. Mr. Henderson has formally withdrawn his offer. He was displeased. His lawyer is threatening to report Brianna to the ethics board. The deal is dead. She just doesn't know it yet. I smiled for the graduation photographer. The deal was dead. Brianna was walking into the dinner believing she had a check for $720,000 in her pocket, when all she really had was a paper trail of fraud. But that wasn't enough. Losing the sale was a business failure. I needed a structural failure. I needed the institution she feared most to turn against her. I needed the bank. My mortgage on the lake house is held by Harbor Point Bank. It is a small, manageable mortgage I could have paid cash, but I kept the leverage for tax purposes. I called their compliance department at 4:30. Right as I was leaving the auditorium, I navigated the automated menu until I got a human. Then I asked for the fraud department. "This is Millicent Green," I told the agent. "I am the owner of the property at 142 Lakeview Drive. I have reason to believe that a fraudulent power of attorney has been used to attempt a transaction on this asset. I need to speak to a senior investigator." That was how I met Grant Ellis. Grant was sharp. He understood the situation in 10 seconds. When I explained that a family member had forged my credentials, he didn't offer sympathy, he offered protocol. "We have to lock down the account," Grant said. "If there is a forged power of attorney floating around, we are required by federal regulations to flag the file. We have to investigate whether there has been an attempt to access equity or modify the loan terms." "Grant," I said, pitching my voice low as I walked through the crowd of cheering families, "I am going to be at a dinner with the person who did this tonight. They are going to announce that they sold the house to pay off debts I do not have. I need you to call me." "I can't just make personal calls, Ms. Green," Grant said. "It is not a personal call," I countered. "It is a verification of activity. You need to confirm if the power of attorney was used to request a payoff quote. Correct. You need to verify if my identity has been compromised. I am authorizing you to call me at 7:30 this evening to conduct that verification. I will be with the suspect. You will be on speaker." There was a long pause on the line. "If I call," Grant said slowly, "I am strictly following the script for a fraud alert. I will state the facts. I will ask for confirmation of the power of attorney. If the answers don't match our records, I will have to escalate it to an active investigation immediately." "That is exactly what I want," I said. 7:30? Grant agreed. So, when I sat down at that table in the steakhouse, I wasn't the victim, I was the director. I watched Brianna arrange her napkin. I watched her check her phone, looking for updates from a buyer who had already fired his lawyer in a rage 2 hours ago. I watched Gavin puff out his chest, bragging about a price that was insulting. It was a fascinating study in hubris. When Brianna stood up to give her speech, I felt a strange sense of detachment. She was talking about saving me. She was talking about my instability. Every word she said was being deposited into a mental account that I was about to liquidate. She really believes it. I thought as I cut my steak, she believes that because she is the older sister, reality bends to her will. She thinks she can sell a house she doesn't own, and that I will just say thank you because I am too weak to fight back. She didn't know that I had already fought back. She didn't know that the ground she was standing on had been hollowed out while she was getting her hair done. "We have a solution," she had said. "I accepted the offer for you," she had claimed. Every sentence was a confession. If I had interrupted her earlier, if I had screamed when the notification first popped up, she would have backpedaled. She would have said it was just an idea. She would have said she was just testing the market, but by letting her finish, by letting her announce the price, the closing date, and the fact that she had signed my name, I had locked her in. She couldn't say it was a misunderstanding now. She had taken credit for the crime. I took a sip of water. My pulse was steady. I looked at my parents, who were nodding along, completely taken in by the performance. They were victims of this narrative too. In a way, they had been trained to see Brianna as the executive and me as the intern. Tonight, the organizational chart was going to be restructured. I checked the time on my watch. 7:27 in the evening, Grant Ellis was sitting at a desk in a glass building somewhere, probably with a headset on, watching the digital clock on his monitor. He was a professional. He wouldn't be late. I looked at Brianna. She was glowing. She looked at me with that benevolent dictator smile, waiting for me to break down in gratitude. She expected tears. She expected relief. "I accepted the offer," she said again, savoring the taste of control. "You did," I said softly. I wasn't agreeing with her. I was confirming the evidence. The waiter poured more wine. The room felt small, tight, pressurized. I looked at the phone sitting innocently next to the vase of lilies. It was the detonator. All it needed was the signal. 7:28. "We are doing this because we love you," Mom said. "I know," I replied, and I did know. They loved the version of me that needed them. They loved the version of me that was broken. They had no idea how to love the woman who had just killed a $700,000 real estate deal between the salad and the entree. 7:29. Brianna picked up her glass. "To family." I didn't pick up mine. I just watched the second hand on my watch sweep past the 6, past the 9, 3, 2, 1, 7:30. The phone buzzed against the white tablecloth. It was a harsh, mechanical sound. The screen lit up. Incoming call, Harbor Point Bank, Fraud Division. I saw Brianna's eyes flick to the screen. She didn't recognize the number, but she frowned. An interruption. A glitch in her perfect evening. "You should get that," she had said. Dismissive, arrogant. She had no idea that she had just invited the executioner to the table. I reached out, my hands steady, my nails perfectly manicured. I slid my finger across the glass. I didn't lift the phone. I pressed the speaker button. The trap I had set 5 hours ago, while sitting in traffic on the FDR Drive, finally snapped shut. "Hello," I said, and as Grant's voice filled the room, confirming the fraud, I didn't look at the bank officer's name on the screen. I looked at my sister. I wanted to remember the exact moment she realized that the little sister she wanted to save was actually the one she needed to be saved from. The phone was vibrating against the white linen tablecloth, a persistent, rhythmic hum that seemed to sync with the sudden spike in my heart rate. It was not fear. It was the adrenaline of an athlete hearing the starting gun. "I really should take this," I said, pushing my chair back. The legs of the chair made a harsh scraping sound against the floor, momentarily drowning out the low murmur of the restaurant. I looked at my mother. Her face was a mask of encouraging pity. She nodded at me, her earrings catching the light. "Go ahead, sweetie," she said. "It might be that interview you were hoping for. Maybe it is the assistant manager position at the bookstore. Or the coffee shop," Aunt Linda added helpfully from across the table. "Actually," I said, my voice steady, "I think it is something a bit more corporate." I did not leave the room. I did not walk to the quiet corner near the velvet curtains. I stood right there, at the head of the table, looming over the remains of the celebration dinner. With a deliberate, almost ceremonial movement, I pressed the green icon on the screen and then tapped the speaker button. I placed the phone back down in the center of the table, right next to the sweating silver ice bucket. "Hello?" I said. The room went quiet. They were expecting to hear a hiring manager asking if I could work weekends. They were expecting to hear me beg for a minimum wage opportunity. Instead, the voice that filled the private dining room was deep, baritone, and terrifyingly crisp. It was the voice of institutional power. "Good evening. This is Grant Ellis, Senior Compliance Officer at Harbor Point Bank. Am I speaking with Millicent Green?" The silence that followed was different from the silence before. It was brittle. I saw Brianna's eyes dart to the phone. A tiny frown creased her forehead. She recognized the name of the bank. It was a major lender, but the title Senior Compliance Officer clearly did not fit her narrative of my life. "Yes, Grant," I said, looking directly at my sister. "This is Millie. You are on speaker. I am at a family dinner, so everyone is here." "I understand," Grant said. His voice did not waver. He was a professional. He knew exactly what role he was playing in this theater. "I am calling regarding the urgent security flag on your mortgage account ending in 4492. secured by the property at 142 Lakeview Drive, Vermont. The address hung in the air like smoke. My father blinked. Mortgage, he whispered to my mother. I thought Grandpa paid that house off in '98. Grant did not hear him, or if he did, he ignored him. He continued with the relentless momentum of a freight train. Ms. Green, per your request for a portfolio review, we have completed the updated appraisal of the asset. I want to confirm the current valuation before we address the security breach. Go ahead. Grant, I said. Brianna was staring at the phone now. Her fork was suspended halfway to her mouth. Based on the renovations completed in the last 18 months specifically, the structural reinforcement of the boathouse, the new slate roof, and the interior modernization, our underwriters have adjusted the appraisal value of the property. Grant paused for a microsecond. The current market value is locked at $1,350,000. The sound of Gavin choking on his wine was the only thing that broke the stillness. $1,350,000. It was nearly double the number Brianna had just proudly announced to the room. It was double the lifeline she claimed to have secured for me. I watched the math hit them. I saw it in Ryan's eyes first. He was the numbers guy, the one who loved to count other people's money. He looked from the phone to me, and then to Brianna. His jaw actually went slack. He realized in a heartbeat that the old rotting shack narrative was a lie. You do not get a $1.3 million valuation on a teardown in rural Vermont. Wait, Brianna stammered. Her voice was thin, reedy. That is not right. That is a mistake. Furthermore, Grant continued, steamrolling over her objection, your outstanding mortgage balance is currently sitting at $42,000. Thanks to the accelerated payment schedule you have maintained over the last 3 years, you have over $1.3 million in clear equity in this property. Ms. Green. My mother's hand, which had been holding her water goblet, went limp. The heavy crystal glass slipped from her fingers. It hit the edge of her bread plate, tipped over, and shattered against the table edge. Water and shards of glass cascaded onto her lap. But she did not move. She did not jump. She just stared at me, her mouth slightly open, as if she were seeing a stranger wearing her daughter's face. $1 million, she whispered. I did not look at her. I kept my eyes on Brianna. My sister's face had drained of all color. The blush on her cheeks now looked like clown paint against the pale, waxen skin beneath. She looked at Gavin, but Gavin was studying the tablecloth pattern with the intensity of a man facing a firing squad. Grant, I said, my voice cutting through the sound of dripping water. Thank you for the update on the equity, but you mentioned a security breach. Yes, Grant said. His tone shifted. It became harder, colder. It was no longer the voice of a banker. It was the voice of an investigator. At 9 o'clock this morning, our system flagged an incoming request to discharge the mortgage and transfer the title. The request was submitted alongside a power of attorney document. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The document, Grant continued, enunciating every syllable, claimed to authorize a third party to liquidate your assets. However, our fraud detection algorithms identified multiple irregularities in the notary stamp and the digital signature trace. Brianna began to shake. It was a subtle vibration at first, rattling the bangles on her wrist, but it grew until her whole frame was trembling. She knew what was coming. She knew the name that was on that document. We have initiated a formal fraud investigation, Grant said. The individual listed as the agent on this fraudulent power of attorney is named Brianna Caldwell. The name landed like a grenade in the center of the salad bowl. 23 heads turned simultaneously. It was a synchronized movement, a wave of realization crashing through the room. They looked at the golden-haired savior. They looked at the sister who had just given a speech about sacrifice and love. They looked at the woman who had claimed to be helping the helpless. Ms. Green, Grant said, I need you to answer a question for the official record. This line is being recorded for legal compliance. I leaned in closer to the phone. I am listening. Did you, at any point, Sign a power of attorney granting Brianna Caldwell the right to sell your property, access your accounts, or act on your behalf. The room was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the air conditioning vents in the ceiling. I could hear the shallow, panicked breathing of my brother-in-law. Brianna's eyes met mine. They were wide, pleading. For the first time in her life, she looked small. She was begging me with her gaze. Don't do it. Her eyes screamed, don't ruin me. We are family. But I remembered the old cut. I remembered the graduation where they told me I wasn't good enough. I remembered the years of condescension. I remembered the email address she created to impersonate me. I remembered the fact that she was willing to steal $600,000 of my equity to fund her lifestyle and call it charity. I looked at her, and I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, crystalline clarity. No, I said firmly. I let the word hang there for a second. I did not authorize her. I have never authorized her. And I was unaware she was attempting to sell my home until she announced it at this dinner table 10 minutes ago. Gavin made a sound like a wounded animal. He buried his face in his hands. Thank you, Ms. Green, Grant said. That is all we needed to confirm. We are locking the file. The investigation is now active. I advise you not to discuss the details further until you have spoken with your legal counsel. Understood, I said. Thank you. Grant, you called at exactly the right time. I reached out and tapped the red button. The call ended. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. It was the silence of a world that had just been turned upside down. The Millie is a failure narrative was dead. The Brianna is a saint narrative was dead. I looked around the table. My aunt was gaping. My brother was pale. My father looked like he had been struck by lightning. And Brianna. Brianna looked like she was trying to figure out how to stop breathing. I picked up my wine glass, the expensive Cabernet that Gavin had ordered to celebrate his wife's brilliance, and took a slow, deliberate sip. It tasted like iron and victory. So, I said, setting the glass down gently, 1.35 million. That is a bit more than 720,000, isn't it? I turned to Gavin. You said the house was a wreck. Gavin, you said the roof was caving in. Did you lie to the family, or did you just not bother to check before you tried to steal it? Gavin didn't answer. He couldn't. And Brianna, I said, turning to my sister. She flinched as if I had raised a hand to strike her. The bank used the word fraud. They used the word investigation. Do you want to tell Mom and Dad what that means for your real estate license? Or should I? My mother finally found her voice. It was a broken, jagged thing. Millie, she rasped, wiping water from her dress with a trembling hand. What is happening? You own the house. You have money. I have always had money. Mom, I said. I have worked at an investment firm for 4 years. I bought the lake house with my own bonus checks. I paid for my own MBA. I don't have loans. I don't have debt. And I certainly don't need my sister to sell my assets for half their value to pay bills that don't exist. The truth was out. It was naked and ugly and undeniable. But why didn't you tell us? Dad asked, his voice thick with confusion. Because, I said, pointing a finger at Brianna, who was now weeping silently, tears tracking through her perfect foundation. Because I knew that if you knew I had anything of value, you would try to control it. You would try to take credit for it. Or, in Brianna's case, you would try to sell it. I stood up. The chair scraped again. A punctuation mark on the scene. I am going to the ladies' room, I said calmly. I suggest that by the time I come back, Brianna starts explaining why she has a fake email address with my name on it in her phone. Because if Grant Ellis calls the police and he was she, is going to need a better story than I was just trying to help. I walked away from the table. I didn't look back, but I could feel their eyes on my back, burning. The air in the room had shifted permanently. The hierarchy was gone. The script was burned. And as I pushed open the door to the restroom, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. I didn't look like the little sister anymore. I looked like the person who owned the bank. I walked back into the private dining room. and the atmosphere had shifted from shocked silence to a chaotic, low-frequency hum of panic. The air, previously smelling of expensive steak and red wine, now smelled distinctively of fear. As I closed the door behind me, the sound of the latch clicking into place acted like a starter pistol. The questions did not come one by one. They were fired in a volley, a wall of noise that hit me the moment I took my seat. "Since when?" my aunt demanded, her voice shrill. "Since when do you own a house in Vermont?" "How is that even possible?" my cousin muttered, looking at me with a mix of suspicion and awe. "You hid this?" my mother asked, her voice trembling, looking at me as if I had just confessed to a double life as a spy. "You kept an entire house secret from your own family, from your parents." I sat down. I smoothed the napkin on my lap. I took a moment to look at Brianna. She was huddled in her chair, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, looking small and defeated, but I knew her well enough to know she was already calculating her next move. She was trying to figure out how to play the victim card in a game where she had just been caught holding a smoking gun. "I did not hide it," I said, keeping my voice calm, projecting the same authority I used in boardrooms when explaining a complex merger. "I simply did not broadcast it. There is a difference." "But Grandpa's house," Dad stammered. "We thought the estate the lawyers said it was settled." "It was settled," I corrected him. "It was settled 3 years ago. Grandpa left a right of first refusal clause in the trust. It is a standard legal mechanism. It meant that before the estate could liquidate the property to pay the inheritance taxes and split the remaining cash among the beneficiaries, I had the option to purchase the asset at the appraised value." I looked at Ryan. He was frowning, trying to follow the money. "The estate was cash poor," I explained, turning to my brother. "You remember that, Ryan? You complained about it for months. You were worried the taxes would eat into your share of the cash inheritance. So, I stepped in. I exercised my option. I paid the estate the full appraised value, which covered the taxes and provided the liquidity that you all received in your checks 3 years ago. I bought the house. The deed was transferred. It is all in the public record. Anyone with an internet connection and the ability to search the county clerk's database could have seen it." I let that sink in. "I didn't steal it," I added. "I saved it, and I paid you for it." "But why didn't you say anything?" Mom asked, hurt flashing in her eyes. "Why let us think you were struggling?" "I never said I was struggling. Mom," I said gently. "You said I was struggling. You and Dad and Brianna decided that because I wasn't married and didn't drive a Mercedes, I must be poor. You decided that my silence was shame. I just let you be right because it was easier than arguing with you." I turned my gaze back to Gavin. He was still staring at the tablecloth, refusing to meet my eyes. "And regarding the condition of the house," I said, my voice hardening, "Gavin told you all it was a wreck. He told you the roof was caving in." I pulled my phone out, my personal phone, not the one that had delivered the death blow from the bank, and scrolled to a photo I had taken 2 weeks ago. I held it up for the table to see. "This is the wreck," I said. The screen showed the house in the golden hour of a Vermont sunset. The new slate roof gleamed in the light. The cedar siding had been freshly stained a deep, rich, warm brown. The new dock extended into the water, pristine and solid, with a 19-foot Chris-Craft boat tied to the cleats. The boathouse, which Gavin had claimed was collapsing, stood straight and true, reinforced with steel beams and fresh timber. "I spent $150,000 on renovations last year," I said, describing the details like I was listing assets in a prospectus. "I replaced the HVAC system. I installed a commercial-grade kitchen. I shored up the foundation with helical piers. That house is not a teardown. It is the most valuable property on the bay." The image on the screen was undeniable. It was a picture of success. It was a picture of wealth. And it stood in stark contrast to the lie Gavin and Brianna had fed the family. "I didn't know," Gavin whispered. "Brianna told me." "Don't put this on me," Brianna snapped, her voice cracking. She looked up, her face blotchy. "I honestly thought it was still family property. Millie, I thought you were just squatting there or something. I thought we still had a right to it." "That is a lie," I said. "It is not," she cried. "I was trying to help. I thought if we sold it, we could finally get you out of debt. I was trying to be a good sister." "If you thought it was family property," I said, cutting through her hysteria with surgical precision, "then why did you need to sign my name?" The room went silent again. This was the pivot point. This was where the logic of her defense crumbled. "If you truly believed the house belonged to the estate, or to Mom and Dad, or to the family in some abstract way," I continued, "you would have had the executor of the estate sign the listing agreement, or you would have had Mom and Dad sign it, but you didn't do that." I leaned forward. "You created an email address that looked like mine. You forged a power of attorney that claimed to be from me. You signed the listing agreement as Millicent Green. You accepted the offer as Millicent Green." I looked at my parents. "You don't impersonate someone if you think you have the legal right to act. You impersonate them because you know you don't." Dad looked at Brianna. He looked at the daughter he had always championed, the one he held up as the model of responsibility. "Brianna," he asked. His voice was barely a whisper. "Is that true? Did you sign her name?" Brianna opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked at Gavin, but he had abandoned her. He was terrified of the word fraud that the banker had used. "I had to," she whispered, "because Millie wouldn't listen. She is so stubborn. I knew she would say no, so I had to do it for her own good. Signing a document for someone else without their permission isn't doing it for their good." I said, "It is forgery, and submitting that forged document to a bank to facilitate a transaction of over $700,000, that is wire fraud, that is bank fraud, that is a federal crime. Brianna, we are not talking about a slap on the wrist. We are talking about mandatory minimum sentencing." My brother, Ryan, slammed his hand on the table. The silverware jumped. "Enough!" he shouted. His face was red. He was angry, but not at Brianna. He was angry at the situation, and true to form, he turned that anger toward the person who had disrupted the status quo, me. "Okay, so Brianna messed up," Ryan spat. "She tried to cut a corner. She was trying to help you pay off your loans. You are sitting here acting like a prosecutor, but let's talk about the real issue. You are the one who has been crying poverty for 4 years. "I never cried poverty, Ryan," I said calmly. "I just didn't brag about my bonus." "Bonus," Ryan laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "What bonus? You are a student. You have been racking up debt at NYU. Don't sit there and act like you are flush with cash. If you bought that house, you probably used every dime of inheritance you had and leveraged yourself to the hilt. That is why Brianna was worried. That is why we are all worried. The student loans are real." "Millie, the student loans are a fiction," I said. "They are a story you tell yourselves to feel better about why I am the youngest." "Bullshit," Ryan said. "MBA programs cost $200,000. I know. I looked it up. And I paid it," I said. "With what?" he sneered. "Waiting tables?" "No," I said. "With my salary." I looked around the table. It was time to drop the second bomb. The house was the physical asset. Now I needed to reveal the liquidity. "I have been working full-time for the last 4 years," I said. "I am a senior associate at Hawthorne Ridge Partners." Ryan froze. He knew the name. Anyone who read the financial news knew the name. Hawthorne Ridge was a quantitative hedge fund that was notoriously exclusive and aggressively profitable. "Hawthorne Ridge," Ryan repeated. "You? But you are in school." "Hawthorne has a tuition reimbursement program for high-performing associates," I said. "They paid for 60% of my degree. I paid the other 40% out of pocket, cash. I have 0 student debt. In fact, I have 0 debt of any kind. Aside from the small mortgage on the lake house which I keep for tax optimization." I saw Ryan doing the mental math. I saw the gears turning in his head. He knew what associates at Hawthorne made. He knew the base salary was comfortably in the 6 figures, and the bonuses could equal or exceed the base. "Do you work at Hawthorne?" he asked. his voice losing its aggressive edge. "I run the emerging markets desk," I said. "My total compensation last year was substantial, enough to buy the lake house twice over if I wanted to." The silence that descended on the room this time was different. It wasn't fear, it was embarrassment. Deep, profound embarrassment. My father looked down at his hands. He realized, in that moment, the absurdity of the evening. He realized that he had spent the last 2 hours and the last 4 years patronizing a woman who was likely the most financially successful person in the room. He realized that the intervention was a farce. They weren't saving me. They were trying to force a successful woman back into the box of a helpless child because it made them feel important. "So," I said, looking at my mother, "there are no loans. There is no financial crisis. The only crisis here is that my sister tried to sell my property out from under me because she assumed I was too broke to stop her." Mom looked at me, tears streaming down her face. But they weren't tears of sympathy anymore. They were tears of shame. "We didn't know," she whispered. "Millie, we didn't know." "You didn't ask," I replied. I turned back to Brianna. She was silent now. The reality of her situation was setting in. The bank investigation wasn't going away just because she was crying. The listing was fraud. The contract was void. Her career was hanging by a thread. But there was one loose end. One detail that still bothered me. I picked up my water glass and swirled the liquid, watching the light catch the condensation. "There is just one thing I'm still curious about," I said, my voice dropping to a conversational tone that was somehow more menacing than a shout. Brianna looked up, her eyes red-rimmed and terrified. "Grant Ellis said the power of attorney had a signature that looked traced," I said. "He said it looked like it was projected from a digital source." I leaned forward, locking eyes with her. "Now, I know I haven't signed anything for you in years. I haven't sent you a birthday card. Haven't signed a check you have seen. So, where did you get it?" Brianna swallowed hard. "And don't lie to me," I warned. "Because if the bank's forensic team finds out you accessed a secure document to get it, that adds another charge to the list." "It was from the old papers," she whispered. "What old papers?" "The financial aid documents," she stammered. "From when you were in undergrad, Mom kept a file. I found a scan of your signature on an old promissory note in the cloud drive." I felt a chill go down my spine. "You went through Mom's old files," I said slowly. "You dug up a document from 10 years ago, scanned my signature, and used Photoshop to place it on a power of attorney." "I just needed it to look official," she cried. "Gavin said we needed a clean signature. Gavin said," I turned to my brother-in-law. Gavin turned pale green. "So it wasn't just you," I said to Brianna. "It was a conspiracy. You dug up the signature. Gavin handled the paperwork. You both planned this. You both executed it." I looked at my parents. "Your help wasn't an impulse, Brianna," I said. "It was a heist. You raided Mom's digital files to steal my identity." The room felt incredibly small. The air was sucked out of it. My parents looked at Brianna with horror. Using a fake signature was one thing. Violating the sanctity of the family's private records to manufacture it. That was a betrayal that went deeper than money. "Well," I said, sitting back. "At least we have cleared that up." I checked my watch. "The bank is going to want that detail," I noted casually. "Source of the forged signature. It helps them build the timeline." "Millie, please," Brianna begged, her voice a broken whisper. "Please don't tell them that. If they know I used Photoshop, if they know it was premeditated." "It was premeditated. Brianna," I said. "You planned it. You listed it. You sold it. You just didn't expect the owner to answer the phone." The waiter, a young man who had likely seen his fair share of Midtown Manhattan drama, hovered near the credenza with a pitcher of water. He looked terrified. He clearly wanted to refill the glasses, but the energy in the room was so volatile that approaching the table felt like walking into a knife fight. I ignored him. My focus was entirely on the screen of my sister's phone, which was still sitting face up on the tablecloth, a digital smoking gun that she was too paralyzed to retrieve. "Let's talk about the email," I said, my voice low and even. Brianna flinched. She looked at the phone as if it were radioactive. I mentioned it to Grant on the call, I continued, leaning forward slightly. But I do not think everyone here appreciates the level of craftsmanship that went into this. You see, when I was at NYU, I used a specific email handle for my student activities. It was Millie, Green, Stern. It was memorable. Everyone in the family knew it. I pointed a manicured finger at her device. The email address logged into your mail app right now is Millie, Green, Stern, Docs. It is almost identical. If you glance at it quickly, especially on a mobile screen or a contract header, your brain fills in the rest. You see what you expect to see. I looked at my brother. Ryan. He was staring at Brianna with a look of dawning horror. He knew how technology worked. He knew that you do not accidentally create an email address that mimics someone else's history. That is phishing, Brianna, I said. That is not helping. That is the same tactic scammers use to steal credit card numbers from pensioners. I created it for you, Brianna burst out, her voice shrill and desperate. I knew you were busy with finals. I knew you wouldn't have time to manage the correspondence with the real estate agents. I just wanted to keep everything organized in one place so I could hand it over to you when the deal was done. You wanted to hand it over to me, I asked, raising an eyebrow. Or did you want to control the flow of information so I would never see the alerts? Because if that email address was the primary contact for the listing, then every notification about showings, offers, and inspections went there, not to me. Brianna's mouth opened and closed. She had no defense because I was right. She had built a silo to keep me in the dark about the sale of my own home. I was going to forward everything, she whispered, her defense crumbling into absurdity. After the closing, I was going to give you the password. After the closing, I repeated, after you had sold my house and cashed the check. That is convenient. Gavin cleared his throat. It was a wet, nervous sound. He was tugging at his collar, his face glistening with a sheen of cold sweat. Look, Millie, Gavin said, trying to summon some of his usual bluster but failing miserably. We are getting hung up on technicalities here. The point is, we were trying to expedite things. The market is hot right now. If we waited for you to get your act together, we would have missed the window. Expedite things, I said, tasting the phrase. Is that what you call it? I turned my gaze to Gavin. He was the weak link. Brianna was a narcissist who believed her own lies. But Gavin was a coward who just wanted the money. Grant Ellis mentioned something else on the call, I said, watching Gavin's eyes. Something that I saved for this moment because I wanted to see your face when I said it. Gavin froze. The bank flagged the power of attorney not just because of the signature, I said. They flagged it because it was used to submit a request this morning, a request for a bridge loan. The silence that followed was absolute. A bridge loan? My father asked, his voice confused. Why would you need a bridge loan if you are selling the house? Exactly so, I said, keeping my eyes locked on Gavin. Usually, a seller doesn't need a bridge loan, but sometimes, if the seller is desperate for cash before the 30-day closing period, they will ask the bank to advance them a portion of the equity against the pending contract. I saw Gavin's Adam's apple bob as he swallowed. The request was for $50,000, I said. Immediate wire transfer, to a joint account held by Brianna and Gavin Caldwell. My mother gasped. It was a sharp intake of breath that sounded like she had been punched in the gut. 50,000? Mom asked, turning to Brianna. Why did you need $50,000 today? You said the buyer was paying in 30 days. Brianna looked at Gavin. The panic in her eyes was real now. This wasn't about saving Millie anymore. This was about a secret they had kept from everyone, including our parents. We had some expenses, Gavin stammered. Closing costs, staging fees, to get the house ready. Staging fees, I asked. For a house you said was a teardown. For a house the buyer was taking as is. You don't stage a teardown, Gavin, and you certainly don't need $50,000 to do it. It was a deposit, Brianna interjected, trying to pivot. We needed to put a deposit down on a condo for you, a surprise. We found a place near the city, and we didn't want to lose it. Stop it, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it silenced her instantly. Just stop lying. The bridge loan application didn't mention a condo. It was marked for personal liquidity. That is bank speak for cash in pocket. I leaned back in my chair. If the bank decides that you attempted to extract cash from my equity using a forged instrument, that moves this from attempted fraud to active grand larceny. We are not talking about a mistake. Gavin, we are talking about prison time. Gavin looked like he was going to be sick. He pushed his plate away. I didn't sign the request, he whispered. That was Brianna. Gavin, Brianna shrieked, turning on him. You told me to do it. You said we needed the cash flow for the... She stopped herself. She realized she was about to say something she couldn't take back. For the what? I asked. She didn't answer. She just glared at her husband, hatred radiating off her in waves. It doesn't matter, I said, because the request was denied. Grant locked the account the moment the signature didn't match. You didn't get the money. All you got was a flag on your credit report and a federal investigation. I picked up my phone and opened my email. But here's the part that is really going to hurt, I said. You went through all this trouble, the fake email, the forged signature, the bridge loan application. You did all of this because you thought you had a buyer on the hook. You thought you had a deal. I tapped the screen and turned it around so they could see the email from Marcus, my attorney. I killed the deal at 3 o'clock this afternoon, I said. Brianna blinked. What? I saw the listing the moment it went live, I explained. I have a monitoring service on all my properties. I didn't call you because I wanted to see how far you would go. Instead, I had my lawyer contact Mr. Henderson's legal team. Mr. Henderson? Gavin asked. The buyer. Yes, I said. My lawyer sent them a copy of the deed and a sworn affidavit that the seller you had no authority to negotiate. Mr. Henderson was not happy. He withdrew his offer immediately. In fact, he is considering filing a complaint against your brokerage for misrepresentation. Brianna looked as if she had been slapped. You knew, she whispered. You knew the whole time we were sitting here. When I was making the toast, when I was talking about the price, every second of it, I said, that is cruel, she hissed. You let me humiliate myself. You humiliated yourself, Brianna, I replied. I just turned on the lights. She slumped back in her chair. The fight went out of her. She wasn't the powerful big sister anymore. She wasn't the real estate mogul. She was just a woman who had been caught trying to rob her own sister and had failed spectacularly. My mother, who had been sitting in stunned silence for the last 10 minutes, finally moved. She turned her entire body toward Brianna. Her face was pale, but her eyes were clear. Brianna, Mom said. Her voice was steady, stripped of the usual coddling tone she used with all of us. I want to know one thing. Brianna didn't look up. She was staring at her hands. Why didn't you ask her? Mom asked. It was such a simple question. It was the question that stripped away all the complex excuses and justifications. What? Brianna whispered. If you were so worried about Millie. Mom said, if you truly thought she was drowning in debt, why didn't you just ask her? Why didn't you ask? Millie, do you need help selling the house? Why did you have to steal it? Brianna started to cry again, but these weren't the manipulative tears from before. These were the ugly, heaving sobs of someone whose entire identity had just collapsed. Because, Brianna choked out, because she never asks for help. She never tells us anything. She just exists. She's always fine. And I wanted to be the one who fixed it. I wanted to be the one who mattered. There it was. The truth. It wasn't about money, at least not entirely. It was about relevance. Brianna needed me to be a failure so she could be a success. My competence was a threat to her existence. You matter, Brianna, Dad said softly, his voice full of pain. You are our daughter. You don't need to commit crimes to matter. But she is better than me, Brianna wailed, gesturing wildly at me. Look at her. She works at a hedge fund. She owns $1 million house. She paid for everything herself, and I am just a suburban agent pushing split levels in Jersey. And whose fault is that? I asked coldly. I didn't tell you to become a real estate agent. I didn't tell you to marry Gavin. I didn't tell you to live beyond your means. You made those choices. Don't blame my success for your insecurity. The brutality of the statement hung in the air. Just then, my phone, the one connected to the bank account, pinged with a loud, distinctive chime. It was the priority alert tone I had set for Grant Ellis. I picked it up. "It is an email from Grant," I announced to the table. I opened it and read the subject line aloud. "Subject Compliance Review Update, Case Number 89004. I scanned the body of the email. "Dear Ms. Green," I read, "this email is to confirm that all administrative access to the mortgage account for 142 Lakeview Drive has been frozen. We have successfully blocked an outgoing wire transfer request for $50,000 that was pending approval. The Fraud Prevention Unit has flagged the account for high-risk activity." I looked up at Brianna and Gavin. "And here is the last sentence," I said. "Please advise if you wish to press charges immediately, or if you prefer we submit our internal findings to the Federal Bureau of Investigation as part of our mandatory suspicious activity report filing. We await your instruction." I set the phone down. "So," I said, "here we are. The bank is asking me for instructions. They are asking if I want to send you to jail tonight, or if I want to let the FBI handle it in due course." Brianna looked at me. Her face was a ruin of mascara and tears. "Millie," she sobbed, "please, please don't let them file it. I will lose my license. I will lose everything." "You should have thought about that before you photoshopped my signature," I said. "I will pay you back," Gavin blurted out. "Whatever costs, whatever legal fees, we will pay you back." "You don't have the money." "Gavin," I said, "that is why you tried to steal mine." I looked at my watch. It was almost 8 o'clock. The dinner was ruined. The family was broken. But for the first time in my life, the air in the room felt clean. "I am not going to answer Grant yet," I said. "I am going to finish my wine. And while I do that, you two are going to tell Mom and Dad exactly why you needed that $50,000 so badly that you were willing to risk going to prison for it, and it better not be about a condo." I took a sip of the Cabernet. It was excellent. "I am listening," I said. The silence that followed my demand for the truth about the $50,000 was short-lived. It was replaced not by a confession, but by a defensive pivot that I had seen coming from a mile away. It is a standard maneuver in the Green family playbook when caught in a lie. Accuse the person who caught you of withholding the truth. "Why didn't you tell us?" It was my mother who asked it again. But this time, there was a harder edge to her voice. She was scrubbing at the water stain on her dress with a frantic energy, as if she could erase the last 20 minutes along with the wet spot. "You let us sit here," she said, looking up at me with eyes that were trying to find a way to make me the villain. "You let us worry about you. You let Brianna stress herself sick trying to find a solution. You let us believe you were drowning. Millie, how could you do that to people who love you?" "Yeah," Ryan chimed in, seizing the lifeline Mom had thrown. He leaned forward, regaining some of his bluster now that the conversation had shifted from felony fraud to emotional betrayal. "That is the real problem here. You played us. You sat there acting like a broke student while you were sitting on $1 million in equity and a hedge fund salary. That is manipulative, Millie. That is sick." I looked at them. I looked at the way they were circling the wagons, rewriting the narrative in real time to protect their egos. If I was the manipulator, then their incompetence was just an innocent reaction to my deceit. It was a fascinating psychological defense mechanism. "I didn't play you," I said, my voice calm, contrasting sharply with their rising volume. "I just stopped correcting you." "That is the same thing," Ryan snapped. "Is it?" I asked. Let's go back. Let's go back to the lunch at the boathouse. 4 years ago, my undergraduate graduation." The table went quiet. They remembered the lunch. It was the day the dynamic had been cemented. "I remember it perfectly," I said. I had just received an offer for a junior analyst position, It wasn't Hawthorne yet, but it was a start, and I had won a merit scholarship for my MBA that covered 60% of the tuition. I was so proud. I brought the letter to the table. Do you remember what you said? Dad. My father looked down at his plate. He remembered. I started to tell you about the job, I continued, keeping my eyes on him. And you cut me off. You put your hand up, that stop gesture you use when you think someone is being naive, and you said, Millie, let's be realistic. That is a commission-based role. You will starve in the city. You need to come home and work at the insurance agency until you find something steady. Dad didn't speak. And then I tried to tell you about the scholarship, I said, turning to Mom. And you patted my hand and said, Oh, honey, scholarships are nice, but they don't cover living expenses. You are going to be in so much debt. We just don't want you to ruin your credit before you are 30. I took a breath. The memory was old, but the sting was still fresh. I tried to tell you the truth that day, I said. I tried to tell you I was capable. I tried to tell you I had a plan, and you shut me down. You told me my reality wasn't real because it didn't fit your anxiety. You preferred to see me as the helpless little girl who needed to come home. So, I learned a lesson. I learned that you don't actually want to know about my success. You want to manage my failure. That is not fair, Mom whispered. But she lacked conviction. It is entirely fair, I said. Think about the last 4 years. Every time I mentioned a late night at work, you assumed I was struggling to keep up, not closing a deal. Every time I drove my old car home, you nodded approvingly because it fit the script. You love the struggling Millie. You love her because she makes you feel needed. She makes Brianna feel successful by comparison. She makes Ryan feel like the responsible one. I looked at Brianna. She was staring at the tablecloth, her face pale, her hands trembling slightly. She wasn't arguing. For the first time, she was hearing the subtext of our entire relationship read out loud. You need me to be a mess, I said softly, because if I am not a mess, then what is your role if I don't need saving? Then why are you here? The question hung in the air, heavy and uncomfortable. Ryan shifted in his seat. He picked up his wine glass, swirled it, and put it back down without drinking. Okay, Ryan said, his voice less aggressive, more inquisitive. But explain the money, the lake house. You said you bought it from the estate. But Grandpa left that portfolio the stocks. We all got the distribution letters. Yes, I said. We did. I got checks, Ryan said, frowning. Dividends, a few $100s here and there, maybe 1,000 once or twice. I just deposited them. I thought it was just leftovers, small stuff. Leftovers, I repeated. That is what you thought. Well, yeah, Ryan said defensively. Grandpa wasn't exactly Warren Buffett. I figured the portfolio was just some old utility stocks he forgot about. Grandpa owned significant positions in 3 major pharmaceutical companies and a legacy tech firm that has split 4 times in the last decade, I corrected him. The leftovers were a carefully managed trust. When he died, the portfolio was divided. We all got equal shares. I looked at Ryan, then at Brianna. You all treated it like pocket money, I said. You cashed the dividend checks and spent them on dinners or car leases. You never logged into the brokerage account. You never looked at the holdings. You never reinvested. Ryan blinked. Reinvested. I took my share, I said, and I actively managed it. I reinvested every single dividend. I rebalanced the portfolio. I used the growth to leverage the purchase of the lake house when the estate needed liquidity. The reason I have assets and you have small stuff isn't because Grandpa loved me more. It is because I read the mail. It was a brutal simplification, but it hit the mark. Ryan was an MBA. He knew the power of compound interest and active management. He realized, in that second, that he had squandered a fortune simply because he hadn't bothered to pay attention. He had assumed, like the rest of them, that anything coming from our grandfather's old life couldn't be worth much. You mean, Ryan started, his voice hollow, the shares, they are still there. Yours are, I said. Unless you sold them without realizing it, but they are sitting in a stagnant account, collecting dust, while mine have tripled. Ryan looked sick. The financial jealousy that had been directed at me regarding the loans was now replaced by a much deeper, more personal regret. He couldn't blame me for this. He couldn't blame the economy. He could only blame his own arrogance. I tried to tell you about the portfolio too, I added, twisting the knife slightly. 3 Christmases ago, I asked you if you had seen the proxy vote materials for the tech merger. You laughed at me. You said, "Millie, stop playing stockbroker with Grandpa's pennies." Ryan closed his eyes. He remembered. "So don't ask me why I didn't tell you," I said, addressing the whole table. "I told you. I showed you. I gave you every opportunity to see me. You just refused to look because it was more comfortable to keep your eyes closed." My father made a sound. It was a deep, guttural sigh. He pushed his chair back slightly, creating a physical distance between himself and the table, as if he needed room to breathe. He looked at Brianna, who was still frozen, her weeping reduced to silent, shuddering breaths. Then he looked at Gavin, who was trying to become invisible. Finally, he looked at me. His eyes were different. The pity was gone. The father knows best veneer was gone. For the first time in my life, he was looking at me not as his child, but as an adult who had outpaced him. "I am sorry," Dad said. It wasn't a throwaway apology. It was heavy. "Dad, you don't have to—" Mom started, her instinct to smooth things over kicking in. "No," Dad said, raising a hand to stop her. "I do. I am sorry. Millie, you are right. I got used to the dynamic. It felt safe. I thought if you were struggling, it meant you still needed us. And I suppose I was scared that if you were this successful, you wouldn't need us at all." He looked at the graduation diploma sitting on the table, the prop I had brought to play the part they expected. "We dismissed you," he said. "We didn't listen. And because we didn't listen, we created a situation where your sister thought she had to commit a crime to fix a problem that didn't exist." He turned to Brianna. "But that doesn't excuse what you did," he said, his voice hardening. "We may have been blind, Brianna, but you were dishonest. You stole. You lied to us. You lied to your husband, or maybe you didn't. Maybe you two were in it together, but you certainly lied to me." Brianna flinched. The judgment of our father was the one thing she feared more than the law. She had spent her whole life curating an image of perfection for him. Now, it was shattered. She looked up at me. Her eyes were red, swollen, and filled with a terrifying emptiness. She wasn't angry anymore. She wasn't scheming. She looked like an actor who had walked onto the stage only to find the set had been struck and the audience had gone home. She didn't know her lines because the script, the one where she was the hero and I was the victim, had been burned. "I just wanted it to be fixed," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I just wanted everything to be okay." "Everything was okay," I said firmly. "Until you touched it." I picked up the linen napkin and dabbed my mouth. I was done explaining. I was done justifying. The emotional audit was complete. "Here is the new reality," I said, my voice projecting clearly in the quiet room. "From this moment on, the dynamic changes. I am not the baby. I am not the project. I am a grown woman with a career, a portfolio, and a very good lawyer." I looked at each of them in turn. "If you want to be in my life, you ask before you act. You ask before you assume. If I want advice, I will request it. If I don't request it, you keep it to yourselves. And if you ever try to intervene in my financial or legal affairs again without my written consent, I won't call a family meeting. I will call the police." "We understand," Mom said, her voice trembling. "We understand, Millie." "Good," I said. I looked at the phone again. The screen was dark, but the threat was still active. "Now," I said, turning my attention back to the weeping figure of my sister and her terrified husband. "We still have the issue of Grant Ellis and the email I need to reply to." Brianna looked at me, hope and terror warring in her face. You said you haven't answered him yet, she stammered. I haven't, I confirmed. But that window is closing. Banks have automated protocols. If Grant doesn't hear from me with a resolution, or if he sees any more suspicious activity, he is required to escalate the file to the federal level. It goes to a review board. And once it goes to the board, Brianna, it is out of my hands. I can't stop it. I can't ask them to be nice. They are obligated by law to report identity theft. I leaned in, delivering the final hook of the evening. So, if you want to walk out of this restaurant without a pair of handcuffs waiting for you in the lobby, you need to do exactly what I tell you to do in the next 10 minutes, and you need to do it with a smile. Brianna nodded frantically. She would have agreed to jump out the window if I had asked. What, she asked. What do we do? We are going to fix the record, I said. But not here. We are going to fix it where it matters. The decision to go to Vermont was not mine. It was a collective gasp for air from a family that had been suffocating in a vacuum of lies for too long. After the check was paid by me, naturally, using my corporate card just to drive the point home, my mother had looked at me with pleading eyes and asked if they could see it. See what? I had asked, feigning ignorance. The house, she whispered. The real house. Not the one Gavin described, I agreed, but I set a condition. You can come, I told them as we stood on the sidewalk of 52nd Street, the city humidity sticking to our skin. But you come as guests. You do not come as appraisers. You do not come as critics. You are going to walk through that door and see the life I built while you were busy imagining my failure. And if anyone mentions the word renovation or market value, I will turn the car around and leave you on the side of the highway. They agreed. They would have agreed to anything. We drove up on Saturday morning. The convoy was somber. I drove my own car, a terrifyingly fast German sedan that I usually kept garaged in Brooklyn to avoid raising eyebrows. Brianna and Gavin followed in their leased SUV, a vehicle that looked flashy but probably had a missed payment notification sitting in the glove box. Mom and Dad rode with Ryan. The drive to Lake Champlain usually takes about 5.5 hours. It is a decompression chamber. You watch the concrete canyons of New York dissolve into the industrial sprawl of the suburbs, then into the rolling green hills of the Hudson Valley, and finally into the deep, stoic mountains of Vermont. By the time we turned onto the gravel access road leading to Lakeview Drive, the sun was high and bright. The air here was different. It smelled of pine needles, damp earth, and deep water. It was the smell of my childhood, but purified. I watched in my rearview mirror as Brianna's car slowed down. She was hesitant. She was approaching the scene of the crime she had tried to commit from a distance. I pulled into the driveway and killed the engine. The silence that followed was heavy. When I stepped out, I saw them all standing by their cars, staring. Gavin had described a wreck. He had described a rotting carcass of a house that was lucky to fetch land value. What stood before them was a resurrection. The house was a craftsman bungalow built in the 1920s. When I bought it from the estate, it had been gray and tired, with moss eating the shingles. Now it glowed. The cedar siding was stained a warm, honey teak color that caught the sunlight. The windows, once drafty single panes, had been replaced with custom architectural glass that reflected the blue of the sky. The wraparound porch, where Grandpa used to smoke his pipe, had been completely rebuilt with mahogany decking. It didn't look like a flip. It didn't look like something Brianna would sell in the suburbs with gray laminate floors and white shaker cabinets. It looked like a home that had been loved fiercely. It is beautiful, Mom breathed, her hand covering her mouth. It is solid, Ryan added, walking up to one of the porch columns and kicking it gently, testing the structure. This isn't a patch job. This is high-end work. I told you, I said, unlocking the front door. I didn't buy it to sell it. I bought it to keep it. I swung the heavy oak door open. Shoes off, I commanded. The floors are walnut, and I just had them oiled. They filed in like schoolchildren visiting a museum. The interior was cool and smelled of beeswax and old books. The sunlight streamed in through the lake-facing windows. illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I led them past the kitchen with its soapstone counters and the commercial range I used to cook meals for myself on quiet weekends, and straight into the heart of the house, the library. This was Grandpa's room. It was the room where the family used to gather, but it was also the room they had neglected the most when he died. This room had been a cluttered mess of papers and dust. Now, it was a sanctuary. I had spent 6 months restoring the built-in bookshelves. Every book was organized, not by color or size, but by subject, just the way Grandpa had them. The leather armchair in the corner was original, but I had paid a specialist to recondition the leather so it was soft and supple again. And in the center of the room stood the desk, a massive, roll-top oak beast that weighed 400 pounds. Brianna stopped in the doorway. She was staring at the desk. "That is Grandpa's desk," she whispered. "It is," I said. I stripped the water rings off the top myself, sanded it by hand for 3 weekends, 300 grit, then 400, then steel wool, 6 coats of varnish. Brianna looked at me. For the first time, I saw something in her eyes that wasn't envy or calculation. It was shame. She looked at the desk, gleaming in the light, and she realized the hours of labor that had gone into it. She realized that while she was busy forging signatures to sell this asset, I was on my knees sanding the wood to save the memory. "You did this?" she asked. "I did," I said, "because I loved him. And because I respect the things he left behind. To you, this house was just a line item on a spreadsheet to balance your checkbook. To me, it is a responsibility." She walked over to the desk and ran her hand along the smooth wood. She looked small in the room. The narrative she had built that she was the responsible matriarch and I was the flighty child dissolved completely against the physical evidence of my discipline. You cannot fake a restoration like this. You cannot fake the patience it takes to bring a house back to life. "I didn't know," Dad said, standing by the window looking out at the new dock. "I truly didn't know you had this in you. Millie, you never looked," I said simply. I walked over to the desk and stood next to Brianna. "Move," I said gently. She stepped aside. I reached for the small drawer on the upper right side of the roll top. It was a secret compartment, one of those clever bits of joinery that furniture makers used to do. You had to press a hidden latch underneath to open it. The family watched, mesmerized. They didn't know about the drawer. Grandpa had shown me when I was 10 years old. On a rainy afternoon when we were playing chess, "This is where we keep the important things. Millie," he had said, "the things the rest of the world doesn't need to see." I clicked the latch. The drawer popped open. Inside, there was a single envelope. The paper was yellowed slightly, but the handwriting on the front was unmistakable. It was bold, angular, and rushed, to Millicent. "What is that?" Ryan asked. "It is a letter," I said. "He left it for me. I found it the day I closed on the house 3 years ago. I haven't moved it since." "He wrote to you?" Mom asked, her voice sounding hurt. "He didn't leave a note for the rest of us." "He left you the money," I said. "He left me the house, and he left me instructions." I opened the envelope and pulled out the single sheet of paper. I didn't need to read it. I had memorized it, but I read it aloud for them. I wanted his voice to be in the room. "My dearest Millie, if you are reading this, it means you did it. You bought the house. I knew you would. You were always the quiet one, the one who watched while the others talked. That is a dangerous quality, and a valuable one. I am writing this because I know my family. I love your parents, and I love your siblings. But they are people who see value only in what can be spent. They will look at this house and see a pile of lumber that can be turned into cars or vacations. They will try to sell it. They will try to convince you that it is too much work, or that it is a burden, or that family means liquidating history for convenience. Do not let them. This place belongs to the one who protects it. If they try to take it from you, remind them that inheritance is not just what you get. It is what you keep. Love, Grandpa. I folded the letter and placed it back in the drawer. The silence in the library was profound. My father was weeping. He wasn't sobbing loudly. He was just standing there, tears rolling down his cheeks, looking at the floor. He had just heard his own father predict his behavior from the grave. He had just been told, by the ghost of the man he respected most, that he was shallow. He knew, Mom whispered. He knew we would try to sell it. He knew you, I said. He knew that you view love as transaction and assets as liquidity. He knew that you would eventually come for this place because you couldn't stand the idea of something sitting still when it could be moving fast. I turned to Brianna. He predicted you, Brianna, I said. He predicted that you would call it a burden. He predicted that you would try to turn it into cash. You proved him right. You proved him right to the tune of a felony charge. Brianna sat down in the leather chair. She looked defeated. The letter had stripped away her last defense. She couldn't claim she was acting in the spirit of the family anymore. The patriarch of the family had explicitly condemned her actions before she even took them. I am sorry, she whispered. I am so sorry, Millie. It is not me you need to apologize to, I said, gesturing around the room. You tried to sell his legacy for $50,000 in bridge loan cash. The atmosphere in the room was heavy with regret. It was the kind of regret that comes too late, the kind that cannot be fixed with a hug or a dinner. They realized that they had lived their lives based on assumptions, and those assumptions had cost them the truth. They had missed knowing me, and they had disappointed him. I walked over to the window and looked out at the lake. The water was calm, a sheet of glass reflecting the mountains. A loon called out in the distance, a lonely, haunting sound. I wanted to stay in this moment. I wanted to let them sit in their guilt for a while longer. I wanted the lesson to burn itself into their memories so deep that they would never, ever cross me again. But the world outside doesn't stop for family epiphanies. My pocket vibrated. It was the work phone, the secure line. I pulled it out. The screen was bright in the dim library. From Grant Ellis, Harbor Point Bank Compliance. Subject urgent. Fraud review. Escalated. My stomach tightened. I opened the email. Ms. Green, following our conversation yesterday, the automated system conducted a secondary sweep of the submitted documents. The notary stamp used on the power of attorney has been flagged across 2 other institutions this morning in an unrelated sweep of compromised credentials. This has triggered an automatic escalation to the Suspicious Activity Report SR filing system. We are preparing the final report for submission to FinCEN Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. If you have any additional context, or if a resolution has been reached that allows us to categorize this as internal error rather than external malice, I need it within the hour. Once the SAR is filed, it cannot be retracted. I stared at the screen. The machine was moving. Grant Ellis was trying to give me an off-ramp, but the automated systems were closing the gates. FinCEN, that was the federal level. That wasn't just a lawsuit. That was a permanent black mark that would end Brianna's career and likely put her in a courtroom facing a federal prosecutor. I looked at Brianna. She was curled up in Grandpa's chair, looking at the letter. She looked broken. I didn't forgive her. Not really. But I looked at my parents, who were already shattered by the letter. If I let this go to the feds, if I let Brianna go to prison, it wouldn't just punish her. It would destroy them. It would turn this house, this sanctuary, into the place where the family died. And Grandpa wouldn't have wanted that. He wanted me to protect the house, not burn the family. Brianna, I said. My voice was sharp, cutting through the emotional fog of the room. She looked up, startled by the change in my tone. The bank just emailed me, I said. I held up the phone. The system has flagged the notary stamp. They are preparing to file a suspicious activity report with the federal government. That happens in... I checked the timestamp on the email and did the math. Less than 60 minutes. Brianna's eyes went wide. The color that had returned to her face drained away again. Feds, Gavin squeaked from the doorway. FinCEN, I said. Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. Once that report is filed, it is over. The investigation becomes mandatory. They will subpoena your emails, your bank accounts, and that fake email address you created. Brianna stood up, shaking. Millie, You have to stop them. Please. I can't stop them, I said. I am not the bank. But I can give them a reason to pause. I walked over to the desk. I pulled a pen and a pad of paper from the center drawer, the main drawer, not the secret one. You have one chance, I said. One chance to save yourself, and you are going to take it right now, at Grandpa's desk. Anything, Brianna said. I will do anything. You are going to write a confession, I said, but not to me. You are going to write a formal statement to the bank and to the listing service. You are going to admit that the listing was an administrative error caused by a misunderstanding of authority. You are going to take full professional responsibility for the mistake without admitting to the criminal intent of the forgery. Because if you admit the forgery in writing, you go to jail anyway. I slammed the pad of paper down on the desk. You are going to craft a statement that says you acted prematurely as an agent without securing the final wet signatures. You are going to fall on your sword for procedural negligence. It will cost you. You will probably be fined by the board. You might get your license suspended for 6 months for incompetence. But incompetence is a civil issue. Fraud is a criminal one. I looked at Gavin. And you? I said. You are going to transfer that $50,000 you tried to steal. Wait, you didn't get it. You are going to transfer the legal fees I incurred to stop you. You are going to write a check to my lawyer, Marcus, for $5,000. Today. I can do that, Gavin said. Brianna, I said, pointing to the chair. Sit down. Start writing. If that statement isn't in my email inbox in 10 minutes, so I can forward it to Grant Ellis with a resolution tag. I am letting the clock run out. She sat down. She picked up the pen. Her hand was shaking, but she started to write. I watched her. I watched her sitting at the desk where Grandpa used to write his checks. The desk he had refinished with his own hands. I watched her using his surface to sign away her pride to save her freedom. I looked at my parents. They were silent, watching the scene unfold. They realized that I wasn't just the owner of the house. I was the head of the family now. I was the one dictating the terms. I was the one deciding who survived. Make it convincing, I told Brianna. Grant Ellis is smart. If he smells a lie, he files the report. She wrote faster. I looked out the window again. The sun was dipping lower, casting long shadows across the lawn. The house was safe. The legacy was safe. But the bill for the emotional damage was about to come due. The sound of my sister's pen scratching against the paper was the only noise in the room. It was a frantic, desperate sound, like a trapped animal digging at the earth. I stood over her, watching the ink flow, ensuring that every word she wrote was exactly what I had dictated. She was not writing a memoir. She was writing a legal confession disguised as a professional apology. I checked my watch. We had 12 minutes before the hour. 12 minutes before the bank's automated system packaged the file and sent it to the federal database. I pulled my phone out and placed it on the desk. Right next to where she was writing, I dialed Grant Ellis. Grant, I said the moment he picked up. I am putting you on speaker. All parties are present. Understood. Ms. Green, Grant's voice filled the library, bouncing off the mahogany shelves. I have the suspicious activity report queue open on my screen. I need a confirmed resolution code in the next 10 minutes, or the filing is automatic. Once it is sent, it cannot be recalled. Brianna's hand jerked, creating a jagged line of ink across the page. She looked up at me, terror in her eyes. She is finishing the statement of administrative error now. I told Grant. She is admitting that she listed the property without securing the final wet signature due to a clerical oversight and a misunderstanding of the estate status. She is requesting the listing be voided immediately. That addresses the listing service, Grant said, his voice cold and bureaucratic. But that does not address the bank. We still have the issue of the $50,000 wire request submitted with a digital credential that did not match the owner. That is the red flag for the feds. Was this an attempted theft, or was this a system error? I looked at Gavin. He was standing by the window, chewing on his thumbnail until it bled. That is what we are determining right now, I said, locking eyes with my brother-in-law. Ms. Green, Grant continued, If this was an intentional attempt to extract equity by a third party, we are obligated to pursue it. However, if the party responsible admits that the request was made in error, perhaps under the mistaken belief that they had verbal authorization, we can close the file as fraud attempt prevented with an internal flag. We won't prosecute, but the individual will be permanently blacklisted from holding accounts or acting as a signatory at Harbor Point Bank. Blacklisted? Brianna whispered. For how long? Forever. Grant replied. We do not do business with high-risk liabilities. Sign the paper. Brianna, I commanded. She scribbled the final sentence and signed her name. It was a messy scrawl, nothing like the practiced, elegant signature she usually used on her real estate contracts. Now, I said, turning to Gavin, we need to clear up the motive, because Grant needs to know why a bridge loan was requested for a condo that doesn't exist. Gavin froze. My parents turned to look at him. The lie about the surprise condo had been thin at the restaurant, but here, in the cold light of the library, it was transparent. Tell them, Gavin, I said. Tell them why you needed $50,000 today. Tell them why you pushed Brianna to commit a felony. I told you, Gavin stammered. Cash flow, expenses. Expenses for what? I pressed. You don't need $50,000 cash for closing costs on a sale that hasn't happened. You need that money for something else, and if you don't tell me what it is, I am going to let Grant file the report. The FBI is very good at tracing debts. Gavin looked at Brianna, then at me. He looked at the phone where the banker was listening. He realized there was no way out. The pressure was too high. The wall of lies had collapsed. The dealership, he whispered. Speak up, I said. The dealership, he shouted, his voice cracking. I missed the floor plan payment last month. The manufacturer is threatening to pull my inventory. I have 3 days to come up with 40 grand, or they are going to come in and take the cars. If they take the cars, I lose the franchise. I lose everything. The room went dead silent. My mother let out a small, strangled gasp. So, I said, my voice dripping with ice. This wasn't about my student loans. This wasn't about saving me from poverty. This was about saving your car lot. We were going to pay it back, Gavin pleaded, tears welling in his eyes. We figured if we sold the lake house, we could take the $50,000 bridge loan now to save the dealership, and then when the full $720,000 came through, we would pay off your loans and keep the rest as a commission. We thought there would be enough for everyone. You thought you would embezzle my equity to cover your bad business decisions. I corrected him. I looked at Brianna. She wasn't looking at Gavin. She was staring at the floor. She had known. Of course she had known. That was why she was so desperate. She wasn't just trying to be the hero. She was trying to keep her husband from going bankrupt. You used me, I said. You used my name. You used my reputation as the failure of the family to mask your own failure. You painted me as the one who needed saving so no one would look closely at your finances. My father walked over to Gavin. For a second, I thought he was going to hit him. Instead, he just looked at him with a profound, crushing disappointment. You risked your wife's freedom, Dad said quietly. You risked my daughter's career. For a car lot. I am sorry, Gavin sobbed. Grant, I said to the phone. Did you hear that? I did, Grant said. Unauthorized access attempted to cover third-party debts. That provides the context. Here's the deal, I said. I have a signed statement from Brianna Caldwell admitting to administrative error regarding the listing. I am going to email that to you now. As for the wire transfer request, Gavin and Brianna are going to formally withdraw it in writing, acknowledging that they lacked the specific written authorization for that transaction. They are going to accept the permanent blacklist status at Harbor Point Bank. I paused. And in exchange, you are going to close the file as fraud attempt prevented and not forward it to FinCEN. Do we have an agreement? There was a long pause on the line. I could hear keyboard keys clicking in the background. Grant was checking the parameters. He was weighing the cost of a federal investigation against the efficiency of a closed case. If I receive the withdrawal of the request and the admission of error within the next 4 minutes, Grant said, I can justify closing the internal review. The system will flag them, but the federal report will be halted. Sending it now, I said. I snapped a picture of Brianna's handwritten confession with my phone. I attached it to an email. I forced Gavin to write a single sentence on the same pad of paper. I withdraw the request for funds submitted this morning due to lack of authorization. I snapped a picture of that too. I hit send. Sent, I said. We waited. The seconds ticked by. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed the quarter hour. It was a heavy, mournful sound. My phone pinged. Received, Grant's voice came through the speaker. I am uploading these to the compliance server. The hold on the account is permanent, but the external alert has been cancelled. Case 89004 is closed. Brianna let out a breath that sounded like a scream leaving her body. She slumped forward onto the desk, burying her face in her arms. One more thing. Ms. Green, Grant added. This resolution protects the bank. It does not preclude you from pursuing civil litigation against the parties for damages or distress. That is entirely your prerogative. I know, I said. Thank you, Grant. You have been very helpful. Good evening, Ms. Green. The line went dead. I picked up my phone. I looked at the email confirmation. It was over. The legal threat was gone. The police were not coming, but the destruction in the room was total. I looked at my family. My mother was sitting on the sofa, staring at the wall. My father was standing by the window, his back to us. Gavin was wiping his nose with his sleeve. Brianna was still slumped over Grandpa's desk. You are lucky, I said. Brianna lifted her head. She looked aged. The confident, glowing woman from the dinner party was gone. Lucky, she whispered. My reputation is ruined. I have to report this to my broker. I might lose my license anyway. You are lucky, I repeated. Because you are not in handcuffs. You are lucky because I am choosing not to sue you for the emotional damage you inflicted on me for the last 4 years. You are lucky because I am letting you walk out of this house. I walked over to the desk and picked up the pad of paper with their confessions. I tore the pages off, folded them, and put them in my pocket. I am keeping the originals, I said. As insurance, if I ever hear you tell a lie about me again, if I ever hear you say that I am struggling, or that I am unstable, or that I needed your help, I will mail these to the ethics board myself. Brianna nodded. She understood the terms. And Gavin, I said, you owe Marcus $5,000 for his time today. I expect the check on Monday. If it bounces, I reopen the case. It won't bounce, Gavin said. I will sell a car. I will make it work. I don't care how you make it work, I said. Just pay it. I turned to my parents. I think it is time for you to leave, I said. Mom looked up, startled. Millie, we can't leave things like this. We need to talk. We need to fix this. You can't fix this tonight, I said. You broke something that took 29 years to build. You broke my trust. You broke the family structure. You need to go home and think about why it was so easy for you to believe the worst about me. We love you, Dad said, turning around. His eyes were red. We do love you, Millie. I know you do, I said. But you loved a version of me that didn't exist. You loved the Millie who needed you. You need to learn how to love the Millie who doesn't. I walked to the front door and held it open. The sun had set. The sky was a deep, bruised purple over the mountains. The air was cooling down. They filed out one by one. Brianna couldn't look me in the eye. Gavin looked like a ghost. Ryan, who had been silent for the entire showdown in the library, stopped in the doorway. I'm going to check my portfolio, Ryan said quietly. The one Grandpa left. You should, I said. It is probably worth more than you think. He nodded, then walked to his car. I watched them drive away. I watched the taillights of Brianna's SUV fade down the gravel road, followed by my parents' car. I stood there until the sound of their engines was swallowed by the silence of the woods. I was alone. I walked back into the house and locked the door. I went into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. Then I went back to the library, The room felt different now. It didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt reclaimed. The lie that had hovered over my life, the lie of my incompetence, had been exorcised. I sat down at Grandpa's desk. I ran my hand over the smooth oak surface, feeling the grain that I had restored with my own hands. I opened the secret drawer again and looked at the letter one last time. This place belongs to the one who protects it. I protected it, Grandpa, I whispered into the quiet room. I took a deep breath. I picked up my phone and saw a text from Marcus. Did they sign? I typed back. Signed, sealed, delivered. It is over. I stood up and walked to the window looking out over the lake. The moon was rising, casting a silver path across the black water. I had my career, I had my home, and finally, for the first time in my life, I had my truth. They had tried to sell my sanctuary to pay for a debt that was never mine, only to find out that the only debt in this family was the one they owed to me, a debt of respect. And tonight, I had collected it in full. This house wasn't sold to save me. It exists to remind everyone, if you want to love someone, ask them who they are first, don't write their life for them. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Drop a comment below with your city or country. Let's see how far this story has traveled. If you enjoyed seeing Millie take back her power, please make sure to subscribe to Maya Revenge Stories. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this video get recommended to more people who need a little justice in their lives. See you in the next story.